A number of months ago, I wrote a series of articles about the importance of sleep. Recently, I became interested in discovering what would happen to someone if they went multiple days without sleeping. I decided to conduct an experiment with myself, an attempt to go 72 hours without sleeping, while recording my findings. I began my experiment at 6:30 a.m. on February 1st. I was already off to a bad start. My research had informed me that it's useful to bank sleep before setting out on something like this, but I had only had a few hours of sleep the night before. This is the first interview I'll be conducting with myself while I try to go 3 days without sleep. I woke up at 6 a.m. today. Went to school, went to work as usual. I'll be able to sleep again on Thursday morning at 6 a.m. I felt optimistic during the first 12 hours. As the night began, however, I became tired and conducted research into ways to stay awake. My best friends became coffee and cigarettes. I wanted to avoid sugar to stay away from a potential crash. The first night brought on waves of alternating alertness and drowsiness, each lasting a few hours at a time. I fought these off with push-ups, coffee, and by splashing cold water on my face. The next day I went to school, followed by work. I felt fine to drive, but decided that day would be the last day I would drive. I didn't trust myself after that. As the day went on, I began to feel a fuzziness in my head. The alternating of highs and lows became more frequent, happening every 45 minutes or so. My face was pale, and I had broken out with acne. I feel sick to my stomach, almost like I want to throw up. A weird fuzziness around my head. My words are sometimes getting blobbled up. My head is getting fuzzy, and I'm having trouble focusing on far off things. I was playing some video games to pass the time, and I noticed that some of the words that I would normally be able to read, I had to move a bit closer to the TV to actually understand. I actually scared myself a little bit because I was reading up on the negative effects of continuous lack of sleep. And while some of them intrigue me, such as the hallucinations and senses of euphoria and other such things, I was a little bit frightened about what I'm doing to myself. It soon became apparent that hydration was going to be important for my success. I've decided now, after reading some articles and just getting a feel for myself, that I'm going to try to drink more water. I think that's probably going to be important if I continue on this path. Mostly I've just been pounding back coffee. Around 10 p.m. on February 2nd, I began to feel exceedingly tired. I avoided the bedroom and lying down, not trusting my own willpower. I needed a way to stay awake, so I decided to go for a walk. It had been freezing rain outside, but I decided to ignore this fact, figuring the cold would help me stay awake longer. I just got back from my walk. It lasted for about an hour. I was only spitting when I left, but it started to come down pretty hard, freezing rain. About halfway through my walk, I got pretty soaked. But I felt really good. It was very refreshing, even though it was cold. It was nice to be outside, getting that fresh air. I've noticed that I wouldn't say I feel bad. I think I'm in one of those up stages again, kind of euphoric. But I don't feel bad, but I feel strange. I stopped at a variety store for a few minutes to pick something up, and I could just feel my eyes were out of focus. I was kind of only like half aware of my surroundings, and I was thinking about this earlier, I've kind of gotten to a point where when I get to those low points, I have to be vigilant to stay awake, but if I right now tried to fall asleep, I don't think I'd be able to. I passed the majority of the night playing video games with my friend. This, for me, is the most difficult part of my ordeal yet. If she had not been there to keep me accountable, I probably would have succumbed to sleep. I began to fear what the next night would bring when I was on my own.
You're gonna have such a help when you're kind of passing out while playing.
Yeah.
And we were up until like 5:30 in the morning playing video games. And he was doing good for a little while, focused, paying attention, but his character would kind of like walking along next to my character, and all of a sudden his character starts going way off into the distance, and I'd have to go, "What are you doing?" And at that point, he'd kind of like almost wake up and go, "Oh, sugar," except, swearing. And have to bring his character back. Like, he just was kind of having these, like, I think they're called, like, micro naps or something, like micro sleeps, where he's so exhausted that his brain and his body are basically shutting down and forcing him to sleep without him actually sleeping. He decided he needed protein bars, so we drove to Metro at 2:30 in the morning, and by that I mean I drove to Metro because he was so exhausted. Like, just walking was, like, dangerous. He was, like, swerving on the sidewalk.
I started drinking caffeine strategically, saving it for my low points in order to keep my tolerance for it low. The ups and downs were happening in minutes now instead of hours, and I resorted to a second walk.
I feel not bad when I'm outside, but as soon as I enter a building, it hits me right away. Sometimes when I'm just sitting, it doesn't matter what's going on, my heart starts beating irregularly fast, and then eventually calms itself down.
His eyes were different. They were a lot more glazed over. Like, he could fall asleep at any second, and no one would realize it. He actually fell asleep in my car, driving home from class the other day. I was driving and he had a lit cigarette, and I was not paying attention to him, and then I saw that his eyes were kind of drooping. And as his eyes drooped, the cigarette drooped closer to my seats. So that was a little freaky, and it made me glad that he wasn't driving or going to work or anything like that.
I realized that sleep had an often forgotten benefit. It helps to structure our days. How do you decide when to shower, when to brush your teeth, and when to change your clothes when you don't sleep? Despite this, I tried to keep a normal schedule. I had meant to be productive with my extra free time, but I was so disoriented that it was nearly impossible. I was tired of video games, so I tried cleaning, which did not take a lot of mental capacity. My girlfriend returned from work around 10 p.m. We decided to go out for a drink. I was avoiding alcohol because I thought it would make me drowsy, but I succumbed to my desires and had one beer. That night I lost all perception of time. The realization led to an instant, irrational, deep sense of dread. Later that night, I began suffering from my first auditory hallucinations. I imagined I could hear a man speaking outside of my apartment, but the parking lot was empty. I also began to hear what sounded like a faraway radio playing hip-hop music. I went online to look into what else I could expect as far as hallucinations went. I had been looking forward to this part the most, but in my current state, the idea only terrified me. I had been sitting in the dark, but at that point, I turned on all of my lights, afraid to be alone. I read horrifying tales about the shadow men. I became largely unaware of my surroundings, trapped in my own head. At hour 71, I saw my shadow scratch its own face. More sightings out of the corner of my eye horrified me, and I cut my experiment an hour short, finally going to sleep. Overall, the experience taught me that I had the willpower to stay awake for long periods of time. I also learned that an extra 8 hours a night can become extremely boring. The experiment was interesting, but I would neither be quick to recommend the experience to others or to ward them away from it. For Spoke Online, I'm Ethan Kompf.